Module 14, Planning for the Future, Part 2. So in conclusion for this course and discussion of this class, it's incredibly important to look at the long-term perspective, not just spending money, but investing money for the kingdom and investing these resources, both financial, but also the personal time that people devote to these things. And it's just an incredible responsibility of the leadership to plan going forward. So, a 5 and 10-year plan being the goal, there needs to be multiple phases in your plan and perspective. So often, and this is important, but so often everything comes back to the next big event, Easter or Christmas. And that's pretty much where it stops. It stops with what's coming up the next 4 to 6 months, what's coming up quarterly. What can we do by then? Well, a lot of these purchases and plans are not accomplished just simply by that timeline. And you really can't make major changes unless you just have expendable income and expendable time to devote to these things. And then the next step would be a 1-year plan. This time next year, we'd like to see this happen. We'd like to have this thing going on. And that's a lot better than 6 months or 4 months quarterly, but it's still a short timeline. I mean, that's just really kind of a maintenance perspective. As we talked about before, there's so many things you have to cover on a maintenance basis and keep up with certain things. But a 5-year plan is a few years down the road kind of perspective. It's saying this is where we'd like to see things going forward. This is how we'd like to invest, and this is our concept, our perspective. So I talked about with the vision and the goals of the church and the areas and reach. How are we accomplishing those things, and what do we want to do, and how do we want to invest towards that? And the decade plan, I mean, this is a master level planning perspective. And this really, you've really accomplished a lot if you even reach this conversation of looking at where do we really see God moving and working, and how can we be on board with that. And I really believe that God uses the vision of his staff. He uses the vision of his pastors, his leaders, his team. And if God's people see the movement, they see God's hand at work, they hop on board. They hop on with vision. And so I know it seems wild to start planning that far out, but it really makes a difference. And you'd be surprised at what God can do if you start looking and planning in that direction. So an objective perspective. Try not to be in a silo or vacuum. It's so easy, especially if you've been in a church long enough. If you grew up at this church, if you're a volunteer and involved in the team, it can be really, really easy to just only see things from that simple perspective, that one bubble, if you will. And so often pastors end up in this perspective. Leaders end up in this scenario where you get kind of complacent and you don't really know what you don't know, I guess is a good way of putting it too. So it's important to have some objective, realistic perspective in your planning. And one of those ways is to bring a consultant in, to bring in a team in, to come see what you've got. And they're going to be coming from all different perspectives and backgrounds. They're going to see what a lot of churches are doing, your size, your area, your demographics, your culture. They're going to say, hey, this is a really good setup for what's going on out there right now. Or this is some areas you really can improve on. I really think you're going to benefit in these ways. Outside perspective is incredible. And I really encourage you guys to have some friends online or local in your area that you can bring in. I've got some friends of mine that I bring a lot of perspective to. You need a team of people you can connect with and gain some insight and perspective from. You can't do it alone. I can just say that. And you really shouldn't want to do it alone. You should want to involve more and more people as possible. And ultimately, our goal is to have a sound mind and perspective. So, some worship tech concerns. Obviously, the audio area would be microphones, sound mixers, cables, batteries. You've got audio interfaces and things that we talked about before. You've got you got the in-ear monitors we talked about, investing in that, multi-track systems that you can set up and have rolling. Hearback personal monitoring modules on stage. There's just so many layers just within the audio realm on its own. The visual realm, the screens, projectors, or televisions, whichever you end up going with, the software that you're running to use for lyrics and for video, the hardware, the computers and things that you're using, the splitters and the devices, and when are those things going out, or when do they need to be upgraded? Are you still on the old version of the VGA cable? Have you moved to HDMI? Or are you running Cat 5? Or are you on Cat 6 at this point? There's a lot of things to consider moving forward and going forward. And so often churches put a lot of money into tech that was cheaper, but 5 years later it's obsolete. It's not even functioning or working. And you got to be really careful. But then some things, just because it's newer, doesn't mean it's necessarily better. I'll just say this perfect example: a sound mixer. It's wonderful to have a digital board, like an incredible investment, wonderful purchase. But a digital board is not necessarily better for your setting. A digital board is not necessary by any means, but it can definitely help or enhance what you have. But just a perfect example, just a church this past week, I led worship at for an event, and it's a friend of mine, his church, and it was like an evening associational meeting, and I could just hear the hum, the grounding issues in the system. But they have a nice digital board, but a lot of the things are antiquated in the setup of the stage. They need to do some wiring. They need to have some updates on some other things. They just got to do new digital board in the hopes that would take care of their issues. But the digital board was not a bad purchase, but it might have been short-sighted compared to some of the other things they needed to address. That's all to say, you've got to really focus in on your priorities and first things first. So lighting, LED, perfect example. A decade ago, LED was the most expensive thing on the market. Now it's almost as cheap, if not at least the same price as much of the other lighting. A lot of the other lighting is like just disappearing. It's almost all LED now. Well, your efficiency, your heat, your temperature on stage is a lot less of an issue. Intelligent lighting is actually way more affordable than it used to be. Wash, different types of color, RGBs. You don't need gels anymore. A lot of this stuff is now digital. There's a lot of incredible improvements and replacements that you can do with lighting. So these are some concerns for worship tech. Your cameras, what kind of pixel rate are you running with? What's the rendering process if you're running for a live stream or you're recording for studio? What's your resolution of this camera that you're using? Do you have just one camera, or do you want multiple camera shots? These are important questions to ask. And so as you're looking at your calendar, looking at your plans, what's the next thing? What's coming around the corner? There's online platforms you have to consider. Are you investing in Facebook and trying to get more traction there? Do you do ads to promote your church services or your events? I've personally experienced a lot of success with creating events on our church page and sharing that event to my personal page and invite people to the event, but also put some traction out there. Spend a little bit of money, like $20 to $50, I think is the most I've ever spent, to promote an event, and you see a lot of people follow it. They find out about it. A little bit of money can go a long way with some of this stuff. Again, your online platforms, what are you doing with those? Social media, I think it's important to have one or two people that head up your social media, people with some consistent content, consistent presence online. Social media is not a means to ministry. It is a ministry in itself. You're reaching people out there. You're reaching especially younger generations, but a lot of people are on social media now. Again, I said online platforms like Facebook, but that's one of the social media platforms and probably the most popular one in certain demographics. And I think it's good to create content in a way that can be shared on multiple platforms. And consistency is the key. But what are you doing with social media? How can you invest and grow that? Your live stream, again, we had 2 weeks of discussion on this specifically, but your computer, your software concerns, your other hardware concerns, what's the lifespan of that? What's the future hold for that? Then also, what about your church's website? Is it easy to read? You know, are you designing your website for church members or for non-members? The best argument I ever heard was website needs to be easy to follow, quick to access, and it needs to quickly send people to your church. Send them to your Facebook, send them to other things, but the website should be for guests. It should not be for members. Members have Facebook. They have other means of communication. The website should quickly get people who are looking at your church to where they need to go. They shouldn't have problems finding information about your church. SEO is it's an acronym for basically how quickly is your website found? How quickly is your church found when people Google your area and say Baptist church or Christian church or just whatever? How quickly do they find your church? Those are important questions, and you can invest a little bit of money and time to help improve that and overall reach more people and community. So I love this image here, the multiple sticky notes. I know they're blank and everything, but some creative boards, some creative planning, creative perspective. A lot of times you'll find out you have a lot of the resources already at hand to accomplish these long-term goals and plans. Some other areas to consider when you're planning is meeting rooms and other areas like it. So like your youth room, typically you want to have some audio-visual lighting set up for like a worship gathering, like a worship service, your midweek time. And so, you know, it doesn't always have to be the newest equipment. A lot of times youth rooms are the hand-me-down sections, but you know, that is a very important area to have up to date, and you can plan your investments to reach those students in those areas. Same thing with the children area. A lot of times they have setups for a children area, but one of the most important things I think so often overlooked, and thankfully churches are starting to see the need for this, but a check-in system. I mentioned Planning Center. They have a wonderful, wonderful software within their suite called Check-ins, and it allows parents to check their kid in virtually on the app or directly when they pull up in person, but it allows a secure way of tracking and keeping kids where they're supposed to be and not sent home with the wrong adult. And y'all understand a lot of those concerns, but technology and some really simple setups can go a long way with that. Again, there's other meeting spaces, fellowship hall, classrooms that require some basic technology needs. Sometimes the television, projector, some Wi-Fi. A lot of times it's some kind of streaming stick they might be using Right Now Media or YouTube, some clips they want to use for their lesson. You want to make sure they have access to those things and be considering, you know, what can you do to improve their access to that. A big thing that I think is becoming less and less contested today, but digital giving, online giving, mobile giving, it seems to be difficult for older generations to understand the importance of, because they've been used to the same thing for all these years. But the reality is there's a large age group that would be more willing to give if it was easier and more convenient to give. And I can speak it personally. It's a lot easier to be able to give when it's online. I can just go and just share it. I don't think that's any less spiritual because it was digital instead of a physical check or physical cash. Whatever we can do to make it the best and most cost-efficient process for the church. There's different packages, but make it easy for people to give. And that's a digital technological advancement that your church can really benefit from. And then lastly, to close out with this, Wi-Fi coverage is an area that's really important for your church to be looking into. Have full coverage in the sanctuary, the worship area, but also in the classrooms and meeting areas. One important thing to make sense of this is that there needs to be separate Wi-Fi set up for non-church members or non-staff members, better yet. If you're not on faculty or staff, you shouldn't have access to the secure account. And the whole idea being it might be connected to your budgets or connected to your main computers that hold a lot of that personal information. And it's important to have that stuff secure. But another really important thing to check is always check your speed. Make sure you're getting what you're actually paying for, and could you pay a little bit more to have a stronger speed, stronger coverage? There's different access points that you can set up around the church campus to get better coverage on campus. But all of these things are important in the consideration of your technology and media. And the idea, of course, again, being have a long-term perspective, have a long-term way of investing your resources that God has given you, and make the most of it. Don't just hoard it away and think that's God will be pleased with that. No, in fact, He says in His Word that He refuted the ones who buried their treasures, buried their talents instead of investing it. And I think we have to be really careful and diligent in the way that we serve the Lord and our technology media. And thank you so much.